Gallipoli was not a place where mercy survived for long. It was a narrow, brutal strip of land where every movement invited death, and every mistake was paid for immediately. The ground itself was hostile. Steep ridges, loose rock, choking dust, and trenches cut hastily into unforgiving soil. Men lived only meters apart, separated by a stretch of open ground that came to be known simply as no man's land. That space was measured in seconds, not distance. To stand up there was to be seen. To be seen was to be shot. Soldiers were trained to understand this instinctively. Anything that moved was a target. Anything that rose above the trench line did not come back down. Between the lines lay the wounded, men who had fallen during attacks that failed within moments. Men who had crawled as far as they could and then stopped. Cries carried across the heat and dust, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. Often, no one could reach them. Attempting rescue usually meant adding another body to the ground. And yet, at Gallipoli, something happened that did not fit the rules of the battlefield. Ottoman soldiers began to step out into the open, not charging, not attacking. They carried no rifles, their hands were visible, their movements slow and deliberate. They walked into no man's land toward their wounded comrades, fully exposed to enemy fire. From the opposing trenches, rifles were raised, sights were aligned, fingers rested against triggers. Every instinct, every order, every lesson learned in training said the same thing: shoot. But sometimes the shots did not come. The men watching understood the risk immediately. This could be a trick. It could be bait. It could be the beginning of an attack. And yet what they saw did not look like an attack. It looked like a man walking to help another man who was bleeding to death. For a brief moment, the battlefield hesitated. Orders did not change. The war did not stop. But the choice was no longer abstract. It was no longer about uniforms or maps or objectives. It was about whether to pull a trigger on someone who was clearly not trying to kill you. This was not peace. It was not a truce. It was something far more fragile. A moment where humanity crossed the line first, and no one knew how long it would last. What happened next was never written into any official report. There were no orders given, no ceasefire declared, no signal sent from command. Yet across this small stretch of Gallipoli, rifles remained silent. The men in the trenches on both sides understood what they had just witnessed. An enemy had stepped into open ground not to kill, but to save. And he had been allowed to do it. For hours, the battlefield held its breath. No shots followed. No retaliation came. Men stayed low, watching and waiting, unsure whether the moment would collapse under fear or survive through restraint. In a war defined by brutality and suspicion, this silence was unnatural. It felt temporary, fragile, like something that could shatter at any second. The story spread quietly along the trenches. Soldiers spoke in low voices, careful not to draw attention from officers or command. They repeated what they had seen. An Ottoman soldier walking into no man's land. An enemy choosing mercy. Men on both sides choosing not to pull the trigger. For many, it was the first time since landing at Gallipoli that the war had paused long enough to remind them who they were before it began. But Gallipoli did not change because of this moment. The campaign continued. The fighting returned. Orders resumed. Men were sent back over the top. The ground absorbed more blood, and yet those who witnessed it carried the memory with them. In a place designed to erase humanity, they had seen proof that it still existed. Years later, veterans spoke of Gallipoli as a place of suffering, confusion, and failure. Some also remembered this moment, not as a victory, not as a turning point, but as something rarer. A reminder that even in total war, individuals still made choices. And sometimes, those choices defied everything the war demanded of them. Gallipoli is remembered for loss, for poor planning, for impossible terrain. But buried beneath the history is this quiet act. A moment when the war did not stop because it had to. It stopped because men allowed it to. And for a brief stretch of time, mercy crossed no man's land where bullets normally lived. The war did not remember these moments kindly. There were no medals awarded for restraint, no commendations for mercy. Official histories moved past them quickly, focusing instead on strategy, failure, and loss. What happened in no man's land was never meant to last, and it was never meant to be recorded. Once the fighting resumed, everything returned to the way it had been before. Orders were enforced, movement was punished. Any man who stepped into the open again would not be spared. The space between the trenches became deadly once more, and the brief hesitation that had existed vanished under discipline and fear. But the men who witnessed it did not forget. For some, it became a private memory they carried for the rest of their lives. A reminder that the enemy they were ordered to kill had once chosen compassion instead. That the rifles had stayed silent, not because they had to, but because someone chose not to fire. Veterans would later struggle to explain Gallipoli. They spoke of chaos, suffering, and exhaustion, yet buried beneath those memories was something quieter. A moment that did not fit the war they were sent to fight. A moment that proved the rules of battle were not as absolute as they had been taught. The Ottoman soldier who walked into no man's land did not change the outcome of the campaign. He did not stop the war. He did not save Gallipoli from becoming a symbol of failure and loss. But he did something rarer. He forced men on both sides to confront a choice they were never supposed to have. Gallipoli is remembered as a place where plans collapsed and lives were wasted. But for a brief stretch of time, it was also a place where humanity crossed the line first. Where mercy moved through open ground, and where men proved, even in the middle of total war, that obedience was not the only thing they were capable of. History rarely records moments like this. They do not fit neatly into victories or defeats, but they endure in the memories of those who saw them. And in that way, they survived the war, even if the war did not survive them. The war eventually moved on, Gallipoli emptied, trenches collapsed into the earth, rifles rusted where they had been abandoned. The ground reclaimed what it could, but the space between the trenches remained long after the men were gone. Those who survived carried Gallipoli differently. Some remembered it as failure, others as endurance. But a few remembered something they rarely spoke about, a moment when the war did not demand obedience, when no one ordered them to lower their weapons, yet they did. They understood how close they had come to killing a man who was not trying to kill them. How easily the moment could have ended differently. How thin the line was between duty and choice. The Ottoman soldier who walked into no man's land was not rewarded. He was not recorded in official histories. His name, in many cases, was lost. But his action survived in memory, passed quietly between men who had been there. A reminder that even in the most controlled environments, individual decisions still mattered. Gallipoli is often remembered for what went wrong. But beneath that story is another truth, that even in a campaign defined by suffering, moments of restraint still existed. Not because war allowed them, but because people did. History does not change because of moments like this. Battles are still lost. Wars still continue. But the meaning of those moments endures. They remind us that certainty is not absolute, that orders are followed by people, not machines, and that sometimes the most powerful act on a battlefield is choosing not to fire. Between the trenches where death usually lived, something else briefly existed. Not peace, not victory, just humanity, exposed and unprotected. And for a moment, that was enough. The war did not stop because of that moment. The fighting returned. Orders were followed. Men went back to their trenches and many never left them again. But something had changed, even if no one spoke about it openly. For a brief moment, enemies had seen each other clearly. Not as targets, not as uniforms, but as men. Years later, when the war was over and the guns were silent for good, memories of Gallipoli remained divided between loss and something harder to explain. A moment when humanity surfaced in a place designed to destroy it. Veterans carried that memory quietly. Some spoke of it, many did not, but it stayed with them, long after the noise faded. History often remembers battles by territory gained or lost, but sometimes what matters most is a moment that left no mark on a map. At Gallipoli, amid one of the most brutal campaigns of the First World War, there was a moment where mercy crossed no man's land, and that moment endured.